Hello and welcome to our webinar on the journey to the modern data warehouse. Joining me is Vikas Mathur, the VP of Strategy and General Manager for Actian Avalanche here at Actian, Emma McGrattan, Actian Senior Vice President of Engineering, and our featured guest speaker is Arvind Rao. Arvind is the Principal Architect for Data and AI at Microsoft. With that, I'll hand you over to our first speaker, Vikas.
Thank you, Pradeep. I'm going to walk you through how Actian plays a role in your data warehouse modernization journey and why our hybrid approach to it is a very interesting way of helping large enterprises modernize in this space. So first, let me give a quick overview of what Actian is. I don't know how many of you have heard about Actian before. The reason I came here was primarily the product. Right? And the high performance order of magnitude, higher performance driven innovation that Actian has in its current product portfolio, as well as what it has demonstrated in the past. So for me, that was the most important piece. Why I came here. I've been here a year and a half and not disappointed by what I see here. So as a company, we are not very large, but we have a fairly strong portfolio of customers, over 3,000 odd customers, really satisfied, as you can see from the customer satisfaction rating, and a good number of them are large enterprises, right? And you can see a list at the bottom, which is where I think our go-to-market focus is towards, as well as from a product point of view, we take hardening our products to make them enterprise ready pretty seriously. Now, let's get into the data warehouse aspect. So when I think of legacy data warehouses, I'm thinking the Teradata, Netezza, or Oracle Exadata of the world. And I'm also thinking appliances, literally, right? So these are all appliance-driven, kind of engineered boxes that at that time were built for analytics workload, which demanded kind of heavy compute crunching performance, right? So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever they were installed, they were typically trying to solve a problem that a row-based transactional database could not solve. Now, over time, they themselves have become legacy. Why? Because one, very hard to get new data into them, partly driven by the IT processes, partly driven by their own capacity of bringing in new data. I say slow performance. So they were built for high performance, but now that the data volume has increased tremendously, the number of users who want to now have access to analytics and run very complex models has grown significantly. So you pretty much hit that compute limit very, very quickly on them. And then you are like, what would have been fast if one user were running on it? Now you have 20 users running on it, and it all kind of slows down and grinds to a halt. And then obviously the cost. And these systems used to be expensive by default, like think millions of dollars. And if you have to expand them to get more compute or more storage, again, you are adding a new box, which again, you're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, again, on top of that, right? And then not to talk about the cost of maintaining them, et cetera, et cetera. So this space has seen a decent amount of innovation happening in the last 5-6 years, especially with the advent of cloud data warehouse, right? So it started off with Redshift, where it basically went, hey, you don't have to spend on another heavy-duty box. You can bring the data that you're at least generating in the cloud or some on-prem data onto the cloud and start warehousing it on Redshift, and this will be on demand, right? So that was the biggest innovation there. It's an on-demand MPP. Snowflake came around 2 years later, and they are now saying, oh, storage and compute don't need to be tied together, which is what was the case in pretty much all previous generations. And they basically are, compute is on demand. So you can literally get the nodes that you want now, and then, once you have to scale it up, absolutely add a few more nodes to it, or a little bit more of compute credit, as they call it, and storage and compute don't have to kind of tie together, right? So that it's again an economic factor that allows them to go another way. Now, we believe what we have done now is literally its own generation. So it's a third generation cloud data warehouse. And where we are coming from is we observe a lot of large enterprises looking at the innovation in the cloud, but also kind of balking at the fact that they have to move all of their data to the cloud. Right? So if you think of large enterprises, be it telecom companies or large retail, a lot of their data is sitting on-prem. And even though strategically they want to move to the cloud, they can't do it over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever period you talk about, right? So the solution to the problem that they have has to happen both on-prem and in the cloud. It cannot be just, I innovate in the cloud and I'm legacy on-prem, right? So whatever we do, and that's essentially where we come from, and that's where we have sort of planted our flags that hybrid is the way to go, and we will solve your problem now on-prem as well as for whatever you have in the cloud, and allow you to kind of go both ways. And obviously we give you a fully managed service. It can handle real-time workloads. You have the pay-as-you-go flexibility as was there in the, the Redshifts and the Snowflakes of the world. So what do we have? Well, this is a summary of our cloud, of our offering. It's the highest performing enterprise data warehouse out there. It's based on a technology called X100 engine, which essentially vectorizes the processing of let's say aggregations or any of the compute that's happening. And it's literally an in-cache type database that allows you to kind of harness every last drop you have in that Intel or AMD CPU. So it's basically optimized for x86 CPU type workloads. It's obviously pay only for what you use, delivered as a fully managed service, available on AWS and now on Azure. And with the hybrid angle, the same technology is available on-prem as well with commodity hardware. Now, our key differentiation, I've been talking about hybrid now, on a couple of things on the last 2 slides. That obviously is our biggest go-to-market factor, and I think the biggest differentiator for us. But I think while that makes us applicable to the customers, what really drives the use cases is the order of magnitude higher performance that we can provide at scale. And I think that at scale part is very important here, because we love large volumes of data, we love complex queries, and we love high concurrency, right? And we do all of that with a pretty limited amount of resources that you use, right? So for example, if you take our resource unit, and if you go to a marketplace type offering, it's like $2 an hour for one Avalanche unit, and you take a Snowflake resource unit, I think we'll show you in a later benchmark that literally our unit is many times more performant than what that Snowflake unit is. So if you think of a meter, right, it's like a taxi meter, and I'm paying $2 every hour. But with Avalanche, you can go from like one city to another, while with the rest, you literally are just going from one neighborhood to another in the same time. So it's just, think of it as extremely high performant in terms of its workload capability. And then lastly, obviously, low and predictable cost. So we pride ourselves that we are keeping the cost profile low. And in addition, given that we can handle concurrency so well, that's where I think most other cloud data warehousing solutions sort of drive up the cost, because they all seem low cost when you're doing a POC or when you're putting it in a sandbox. When you go to production workloads, and now you're talking about 100 concurrency or 200 concurrency, at that point, their answer is spin up more virtual warehouse, right? Which is like, okay, if I spin it up, then I'm literally doubling my meter at which I'm running. So my cost, even if I budgeted $50,000 a year, will suddenly be 150 or 200K a year. With us, given that we can handle significantly higher concurrency, you will not see that doubling happening that quickly. This is a deep dive on how the hybrid piece works. So the key here is that we have one equivalent technology, both on-prem and in the cloud. And we have this concept of federated query that allows you to keep the data wherever is the best place for it to reside, whether on-prem or in the cloud. And the query can then be divided up to run in the right place, and you can get the results from wherever you initiated the query. So I think that's the key part here that essentially enables us to allow customers to go on that journey at their own pace. This is a quick look on the performance side. We ran this benchmark earlier this year. This is a TPC-H 10 terabyte benchmark, and as you can see, when you are a single concurrency, when it's a single user workload that we are running of TPC-H 10 TB, we are about 5x better than them for every resource unit that you're using, right? So a Snowflake credit versus Avalanche unit, same price, but you get 5x more distance covered out of that. But the moment you introduce concurrency, the gap increases, which is very important, because when you go from POC to a production, that's what you will see. You will see the amount of distance you can cover with us, or amount of work that you can do with us, is significantly higher than what you would ever get with other cloud data warehouse options. And we're just using Snowflake as an example here. This would apply to a lot of other options that you have in the cloud, including Redshift, etc. Now, all that is good for current competitors. Now, you think about what we would do for your incumbents, which is essentially the Teradata estate that you have, or the Netezza estate that you have on-prem. And what is the value prop? So in reality, the value prop, again, hinges on the same points, right? One, we can create significant headroom. So if you are compute limited, if you're storage limited, if you have people who want to put new workloads on these boxes, we can give you significantly higher performance if your applications demand it, or significantly more headroom on the same amount of compute, on the same amount of infrastructure, right? So that allows you to kind of handle more work done. Second, we can do all this at a lower cost profile. So many of our customers that we come across are, at 1 year or 2 year away from their upgrade cycle. Upgrade cycle essentially means if you bought an appliance, literally the life is 3 to 5 years. At some point, you will need to the incumbents, so Teradata or Netezza or Exadata, will end of life that appliance, in which case you will have to upgrade to the next generation of that appliance. Now, all that is good, but that essentially means you will have to lay out more CapEx to buy that new generation appliance. So what we offer is no CapEx needed. We literally take your current OpEx, and we have the ability to lower it because of the cost profile of commodity hardware that we use and the lower cost for the software that we bring in, which is literally our own IP. All this can be offered as a managed service. In the cloud, we have Avalanche, and for the on-prem version, we have our SI partners who then run a services thing on top of it, HCL being a major partner for us in that offering. We have obviously the elastic capability to scale up and down as needed. And the biggest risk in all these things is migration, right? If I am Teradata, I have a bunch of BT scripts, which are custom, right? If I am Oracle, I have a bunch of PL SQL code, which is custom. How do I migrate them? Well, what we have done is we have gone in and either created our own automated scripts to move the data, migrate the DDL, and convert these custom things into what would be a Actian Avalanche equivalent. Or in some cases, like in Teradata, we have partnered with people who have those automated toolkits and best of breed of those, and we bring those to bear into our customer migration scenarios. And lastly, obviously, we have comprehensive ecosystem support. When I think of ecosystem here, I'm thinking ETL partners who are largely incumbents in many of these cases, be it Data Stage, be it Informatica, or the ability to connect to BI partners, could be Power BI in case of Avalanche, in case of Azure, or Tableau and Clix of the world in that respect. And we also have good connectivity to kind of the new age data science type tools, so be it Jupyter Notebook, be it Python, workbooks, etc. This is a quick case study. I think in all of these cases, the value prop is very compelling, but there is nothing like, have you done it before? So yes, we have done it before. This is an example of a Netezza migration to Actian, where for a large bank, in this case, they ended up reducing their OPEX by about 45%. And if you include the migration cost, then it's about 33% reduction. Obviously, the mileage varies based on how much you're paying your current vendor and how well have you negotiated with them. But we achieved a pretty high conversion rate of all of the custom pieces, which is pretty important because that's what drives the length of the project, as well as the net dollar value associated with the migration, etc. So I hope this gives you a good idea of how we can enable the journey to a modern data warehouse using a hybrid approach, which is especially applicable for large enterprises. And when we say modernize, we are basically saying access to the ability to handle a lot more work, so a lot more users, a lot more queries, whichever way you look at it, lower cost, and also actually it helps you with accessing a lot of modern ecosystem places, right? So for example, we have built-in connectivity to Spark that then allows you to create Spark pipelines in your tool of choice, be it Databricks on Azure, for example, and then dump the data into Actian Avalanche for consumption. So I'll pass it over to Emma now, who will actually show you Avalanche in action.
Thank you, Vikas. I'm Emma McGrattan, and I'm Senior Vice President for Engineering here at Actian. I've been with Actian since 1992, working with data since before it became big. So let me start by setting the context for this demonstration. This particular demonstration was inspired by a project that we undertook with the risk management department of a large multinational bank. Now, for those of you like myself that are not particularly familiar with risk management, you can think of it as minimizing the chances of losing money when conditions change. So let's give a more concrete example. So let's say I'm working in the foreign exchange department of a large bank, and I'm going to make a decision considering whether I'm going to exchange US dollars for a large quantity of Chinese currency. So before executing that exchange, what I need to do is to calculate the risk that the imposition of tariffs might have. So for instance, if tariffs are applied on Chinese goods being imported into the US, it's likely the value of the Chinese currency relative to US dollar is going to change as a result of that. So what we're going to do is to use the underlying data to drive a decision on that exchange. So some of the things that contribute to market risk include stock prices, fluctuations therein, interest rates, currency exchange rates, commodity prices. Credit risk needs to be factored in, and operational risk, right? Are the right controls in place for the business? So we have a number of users of a risk system. So we start with the traders. And typically the traders want real-time access to the data. They want to make trading decisions at an instant in time and to get the jump on the competition. The traders then will typically report up to a trading desk. And then we've got the risk officers, and the risk officer's job is to make sure that the traders aren't exposed, the desks aren't exposing risks beyond certain thresholds that are set. It's very important that risk is managed. We've had a number of banks that have had big issues when they haven't managed risk and they've lost a lot of money. So compliance and regulations are in place, right? So the next will be the compliance officer, and their job is to make sure that the bank is operating within the regulations that have been set, so that they're not exposing risk beyond a certain threshold that has been set, and that they're providing all of the reports to the regulators that are required to demonstrate that they're not exposing risk. Then you've got the regulators who will obviously have access to daily reports, make sure that everything's going okay, but they'll also come in and make sure that all of the controls are in place and that everybody's accountable for risk across the business. So they'll ask questions and they'll expect answers in real time to those questions. So lots of different users on the risk management system, and they'll be doing a bunch of things, right? So looking at historical P&L, investigating day-to-day changes in risk measures, looking for breaches, looking for jumps, running simulations. So, if I were taking out a mortgage today and I was to calculate the risk of that mortgage versus what happened in 2008, that would tell me a lot about what's going on. And then I can back test models, right? Run models against older data sets. So lots of users of the system, lots of different use cases, large volumes of data, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And all of this led me to believe that this could be quite an interesting demonstration, that while this particular demo is based on risk, what you'll see as we get into Power BI is that it has a lot of parallels across different industries. So while this is risk management, it could just as easily be retail or something like that. So for the customer that inspired the demo, when we first got there, the challenge that they had was that they had a whole bunch of users, business users all the way to the right, that were using a set of reporting tools that were being pointed against an OLAP cube. And the reason they had created an OLAP cube was that they needed to give answers to their business users fairly quickly, and they felt that the best way of doing that was to pre-compute the answers. Right? So what they did was they built up this OLAP cube on a set of dedicated hardware using some dedicated cubing software and a set of individuals that had some fairly specialized skills. And they then pre-computed the answers to questions that they knew were going to be asked of the data. So when you're dealing with cubes, you have to understand exactly what questions are going to be asked and to make sure that the answers are held within the cube. If you ask a question that's not answered by the data within the cube, that cube needs to be rebuilt. So very inefficient, not very flexible, causing real challenges for the business, which is why they brought us in. Another challenge that they had was based upon the fact that it was on a dedicated hardware environment and that had a fixed size of memory available to them. So they couldn't store more than 40 days worth of data in the cube, and they had a limitation on the number of attributes and calculations that could be supported by that cube. So what they decided to do was to move away from using the cube and to come with a different approach that would allow them to have real-time access to the data so that they could operate upon it in a way that was much more flexible. So what Actian did when we came in first was to replace the relational database that they had been using with Avalanche Cloud Data Warehouse, which you've just heard about from Vikas. And they loved the fact that this was a hybrid approach and that they could move to our Azure implementation of Avalanche, but also they had some projects that they wanted to keep on-premise, and because of regulatory compliance requirements, that they could actually split their data across the same technology deployed on-premise as was being deployed in the cloud. So they have still got this fact table that sits on top of Actian Avalanche, as well as a bunch of dimension tables, but they replaced the cube and instead provided the business users with real-time access to the data. So instead of going against cubes and having a set of questions that they already knew that they wanted to ask, we removed that complication from the architecture and provided real-time access to the data. For certain use cases, they wanted to make use of a OLAP cube, and in this case, they had all of the dimension tables represented within that OLAP cube, and the fact table is read in real time from Actian Avalanche. So the movement from their prior architecture to this one meant that they were no longer limited to 40 days worth of data. They no longer had a fixed set of calculations that were done in advance and pre-computed. Instead, they could do arbitrary calculations on demand against the data set. So this set them up for success. They wanted to extend the data set that they were querying from 40 days to 50 days, which represents 250 billion rows of data. Avalanche obviously can scale well beyond that, but for this particular use case, this more than met the business requirement. For the purposes of today's demonstration, let me show you a little bit about the environment that we're running. So we have a 4AU instance of Actian Avalanche on Azure, and this is probably the smallest instance that we support in a production environment. Very small instance that we're using here for the demonstration purposes. We also have a virtual machine set up in Azure that's used for our analytics environment. So there I have a Power BI gateway. It's also where the OLAP cube is instantiated. And then what you'll see is in the demonstration we have Power BI accessing the Actian Avalanche environment, going directly against the database and not through the gateway. So what you see here in Power BI is our summary page. And what you'll see is that we have a data set that consists of 50 full days of data, which consists of 5 billion rows, which are equally distributed across the 50 days, so about 100 million records per day. You also see the size of our position and the market data set size. So now let's look at the business hierarchy. What you notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is that we are running in direct query mode. So these queries are being run directly against Actian Avalanche running on Azure. So we're going to choose a particular business group. So what you'll see here is that in real time, we calculated the measures and aggregated them for every level within that hierarchy. So in this particular instance, we're dealing with risk data. This could just as well be retail stores, right, where you've got that hierarchy where you've got stores within a region. Within the region, you've got individual stores. Within the individual stores, you've got departments and so on. This is the business hierarchy. If we then move on to the hierarchy with trend, in here we're able to choose multiple dates. So if we want to look at trends across a set of days, I'm just picking at random here some days that might be interesting. And then I choose the business group for which I want to look at those trends, and then click outside here, and again you'll see fairly quickly that data being populated back. So these aggregations are happening very quickly, and as I mentioned earlier, we're in direct query mode, so we're going against the real data set. So now, as I move on to the Asset Class tab, you'll see I have an additional set of filters that I can use. I can choose multiple dates for which I want to look at this. As I click out of there, you'll see that this is all happening in real time. Again, we're running in that direct query mode against the 5 billion rows of data representing 50 days. And each day that I choose within that COB data set represents another 100 million rows being brought into the mix. So this is all being calculated very quickly in real time. You'll see each of the elements within the dashboard being updated and refreshed to actually reflect what's going on in the environment. The MDS tab allows us to do analysis for the market data set, and we can also do analysis for market position. So, important thing to note here, we've greatly simplified the environment by deploying Actian Avalanche on Azure in place of the on-premise relational database solution that was being used previously. We've taken the OLAP cube out of the mix, so it gives us real-time access to the business data. So as updates are happening within this data set, they're reflected in the queries as they're being run. We're running in direct query mode, so the results are coming back in real time. As I mentioned, this is just a 4AU environment, so our smallest production environment supported. You were able to handle this level of detail. Complexity of query is not great because these are mostly aggregations, and what you'll see is that those aggregations are being calculated across a very large data set very promptly. So that's it for the demonstration. At this point, I'll transition to Arvind Rao, who's a principal architect in data and artificial intelligence at Microsoft.
Thanks, Emma. Good to see amazing things your team is doing on Azure and how your team is taking full advantage of Azure capabilities. My name is Arvind Rao. I work for Microsoft as a principal cloud architect specialized in data and analytics. I lead data and analytics practice for OCP team, which stands for One Commercial Partner Tech team, and also because of my deep association with Azure Compute and networking engineering teams, I also lead large data center transformation projects for One Commercial Partner team. I started my career in Microsoft about 20 years back as a software engineer in SQL Server development team, and since last 20 years I have been working with different engineering teams, mostly doing product design and development. Since last 6 years, I am spending majority of my time working with partners and customers and bringing their complex data and big data workloads into Azure, helping partners realize true value of their data on cloud and get insights from their data using Azure's data analytics and AI capabilities. Today I'm here to talk about why Azure makes great home for Actian's Avalanche Data Warehouse product. Let me start by spending some time on what we are doing on Azure and how partners and customers are leveraging Azure today. As you see on screen, Azure is future ready and it makes its customer and partners also future ready. Microsoft is investing a lot in its research and development. We are going to make sure we have technology that's meeting not only your development needs and demands of today, but also for your product visions of tomorrow. Below is some proof of few capabilities that we have released in last few months that makes us and your team future ready. We have released over 1000 new capabilities in last 12 months. We have most comprehensive artificial intelligence portfolio in the market. Our analytics engines are 14 times faster and cost 94% less than our compete. We have broadest of IoT ecosystems available in the market. We have end-to-end mixed reality platform. We are investing and we are quantum ready to make sure that you as a customer and you as a partner are also future ready. That's what I mean by Azure is future ready. Now coming to build on your own terms, developers play a very big role in Azure. It's all about being able to build your app on your own terms with frameworks, the tools, the OSs of your own choice, tools that you love. Microsoft and Azure is ensuring you have freedom and flexibility to build and deploy your application with quality and confidence on your own terms. As you heard from our partner Actian team earlier, it's very important for their customers and others to have data and applications that can meet hybrid requirement. Azure provides customers technology that can run on public cloud or private cloud or on hybrid. Azure is making seamless integration of applications that can run anywhere including on your own edge devices. Actian's Avalanche Data Warehouse on Azure is a very good example of how Actian team is leveraging Azure's hybrid capabilities to help customers get insights of the data, no matter where data resides or what kind of data it is. Last but not the least, of course, all about trust. Nothing is more important than trust, particularly when you are talking about the cloud. It's about trust, security, and reliability. With respect to compliance, we have the highest number of compliance certifications around the world, and that's not easy to get that. But that's because we have invested ahead of the curve. We will continue to do so in future too, because that is a place of great pride for all of us in Microsoft. And we strongly believe we have responsibility in the industry to serve that type of a role. To summarize, Azure is not only providing services that are future-proof, but also enabling partner and customers build their applications on Azure for future growth, performance, and scale. Azure is providing developers to build their applications solutions with the tools that they are comfortable and love, and that can run on-prem, private or public cloud or hybrid or even on edge. All this seamlessly with trust and compliance. This should give good idea and insight into why Actian chose Azure as their trusted platform to host their customers and their own mission critical data warehouse solution called Avalanche on Azure. Azure is not new to any of Fortune 500 customers. More than 95% of Fortune 500 customers are seriously invested and using Azure to run their mission critical applications on Azure. Here are a few customers that we proudly showcase that fall into various industry categories like automobile, retail, healthcare, transportation, banking, or you name it, you can find them. We are very proud to host them on Azure. Other good reason why Actian chose Azure to host their Avalanche data warehouse on Azure is scale and presence of Microsoft data center all over globe, providing safe, secure, and compliant cloud platform. As you see on the screen, Azure has 54 global regions. We have more than 3,500 security specialists, all FTEs, monitoring Azure data center 24 by 7. We have advanced tools using machine learning and deep learning to detect any malware or malicious activities happening either in physical location or any data or any other assets. Microsoft invests more than $1 billion in cybersecurity to protect its assets and customer assets. As you can see, Azure is most compliant cloud platform available in market today with whopping 91 compliance certifications. We keep updating this as and when required, and we keep adding new certifications as customer government need changes. Now let's talk about some of Azure services and investment that Microsoft is doing. If you have not already seen about all the cool innovations and new services that Azure has been releasing recently, which is making Azure as a default cloud provider for many partners and customers, here is a glimpse. Let's start with compute. Our virtual machine and other compute SKUs not only meet most of the customer requirement, but in most cases, they can even exceed their requirements. Customers and partners can get simple couple of core virtual machine to few hundred cores of virtual machine in fraction of minutes. Most importantly, it's not just Windows virtual machine. They can even get fully loaded virtual machine with Linux or fully loaded Oracle or fully loaded third-party tools all in fraction of minutes. In today's world, modernization of apps and containerization go hand in hand. To realize true value of modernization, app modernization, many partners and customers are choosing containerization as an easy step towards digital transformation and app modernization. Azure's story towards app modernization containerization revolves around EKS, Azure Kubernetes Services. Talking about networking in Azure, we not only help you extend your data center to Azure, but also provide many network capabilities to communicate with your on-prem data center and Azure, along with many security features in the form of network security groups, gateways, DDoS protection. All the enterprise needs for reliable, scalable, and secure networking features can be provisioned in Azure with few clicks and using the tools that you are already comfortable with and the tools that you are using already on-prem. We spoke about Azure Compute, Azure Container, app modernization, networking. All these services need storage to store data. Azure offers you a wide variety of storage options to meet your structured, unstructured, cold, warm, and hot data needs. Depending upon your SLA and throughput requirement, you have multiple options to choose from and dozen odd Azure storage services. You can use blobs, queues, files, managed disk, or Azure Data Lake. As a matter of fact, Actian's Avalanche Data Warehouse use Azure Data Lake 2 to store their data. Number of Azure services that we have today is already too long to go through. Let's quickly browse through some of them. We have Azure Stack, Security, Identity, Management Tools, DevOps, Dev Tools, Migration, Sovereign Cloud to help government needs, web, data, and list keeps going. In the interest of time, I'm not going through run through each and every Azure service list. Let's move fast. Wow, that was a huge list of services that we have. Finally, here is a snapshot of all Azure services as of last month. Even if I want to spend a couple of minutes on each of those service definitions, I'm sure a whole day of workshop will not be sufficient. We are releasing new services and optimizing existing services to meet customer needs. We will continue to do so and help partner and customer meet their end business goal. One thing what we could do to stitch all those above Azure services is to build an intelligent application that's world-class, enterprise scale, that's not only for regular users, but also meets needs of special needs. Microsoft strongly believes in building applications, products, and software that help people realize their true potential. Here is a video to showcase how we are using Azure Data Platform, cognitive services, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning to help and meet everyone's need. Today, using Azure management, hundreds of millions of Azure resources are organized, governed, and secured daily by customers. That's great for Azure customers. But as you all know, few customers and partners prefer to build their solution that can run on multi-cloud. Quite a few of these customers don't even want to commit to a single cloud strategy. Hence, to help those customers and partners with hybrid and multi-cloud management needs, earlier this month in November, Microsoft announced Azure ARC. Azure Arc extends these proven Azure management capabilities to Linux and Windows servers as well as Kubernetes clusters on any infrastructure across on-premises, multi-cloud and edge too. What it means is if you want to manage infrastructure across other cloud providers, you can use Azure Arc and have consistent security policies implemented across, which means Actian can now use Azure Arc and manage their services that Avalanche uses on Azure, not only on Azure, but also on other cloud providers and even on on-prem too. How cool is that? From Azure portal, using Azure Arc, customers can get a unified and a consistent view of all their Azure data services running across on-premises and on different clouds and can apply consistent policy, security and governance of data across environments. Before I end, I want to thank Actian team for giving Microsoft an opportunity to talk about Azure and how Azure is providing services globally with high performance, scale, and most importantly in a safe, secure, and compliant manner. I want to congratulate Actian team for successfully launching their Avalanche data warehouse product on Azure. Lot of hard work has gone for this launch from both Microsoft and Avalanche team. From Microsoft partner team, we will continue to collaborate and work with Actian team to meet customer needs. We are excited to further collaborate and infuse intelligence into Avalanche data warehouse by using our modern artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning services. With this, I will hand over to Pradeep.
Thank you, Arvind. That was a great presentation. Now I'd like to hand over to Vikas to moderate our Q&A. Just a reminder to use the chat function to ask questions if you haven't done so already.